Hello Nutrition 160 students, and welcome to Chapter 12, Water and the Major Minerals. So let's do a little pre-assessment for those of you that maybe read your book ahead of time or just want to have a little fun segment in which you guess and test your knowledge. So you can pause the video after I read the questions and answer them on your own, and then come back and play the video to see if you got them correct. Water accounts for about blank amount of an adult's body weight, and you have to explain why body composition and gender influence the body's proportion of water. So as you see, the second one is a short answer essay. So you might want to write your answer down, pause the video, and then come back and check your answers. So the answers are as follow. According to your book, water accounts for about 60% of an adult's body weight. You're going to find that for those of you that read many college textbooks or many textbooks in general regarding water and the human body, the percentage can vary anywhere from 55 to 75% depending on the book that you're reading. Also, many factors influence how much water a person has. Second, here's the explanation. So lean tissue weight is about 75% water compared to 25% of fat tissue. In females, obese people, and the elderly have a smaller proportion of lean tissue. Thus, a lower proportion of their body weight is water. So here are some functions of water in the human body. And again, I want to mention that water is arguably the most essential of all the nutrients, and it's ubiquitous in the body, meaning it's forever present in almost every single cell, every single area of our body. Our water is made up of a lot of body. It's a watery environment. And again, I also want to mention that fat-free mass, which includes muscle mass, is anywhere from 70 to 75% water, depending what textbook and what body of literature that you are reading. Now, it also carries nutrients and waste, so it's a transporter, and it maintains structure of large molecules. For example, when you store glycogen in the body and many other compounds in the body, you also store water along with them, and it gives it structures. We also find water as body structures in our joints and many other areas in the body. And it, for example, it's part of synovial fluid. Synovial is spelled S-Y-N-O-V-I-A-L. So it's part of that fluid which lubricates our joints. It participates in metabolic reactions. It's that medium or body of water that allows chemical reactions to happen. It's a solvent. If you've ever, anyone in here who's ever made a smoothie, whatever base you used for your smoothie, whether it was milk, almond milk, a fruit juice, or water, that main liquid is considered a solvent where minor components are dissolved in. It acts as a lubricant and cushion. Like I mentioned before, we do find it in body structures like our joints, like the synovial fluid that lubricates our joints. It aids in regulation of body temperature as well, and it maintains blood volume. Now, a lot of our blood is also water, and we're going to talk about later, there's a component in our blood that is clear to yellowish in color called the plasma, and that's about almost all water, about 90% water. Distribution of body fluids. So you can also pause this and see if you can match them. So you can match A, intracellular, which one does it belong to? B, interstitial, what does it belong to on the right side? C, extracellular, match that. And then D, intravascular, match that. You can pause the video. And now when you come back here, here's the revelation of the answers. So A goes with D. Intracellular fluid or water is fluid inside our cells. B, interstitial fluid is fluid surrounding the cells. C goes with B. Extracellular fluid is the fluid outside our cells. And then D, intravascular, goes with A, which is fluid with blood vessels. Now, just to, hopefully I don't confuse you guys, but I want to let you know that that fluid outside the cell, the extracellular part, can be broken down further, and part of that extracellular fluid is the interstitial fluid that we found surrounding our cells. So here's an example of where we find fluids in the human body in regards to the cell. So again, I'm going to go over lecturing a little bit, but I want you to know that we find the majority of the water in your body is found the majority of it is found inside of your cells or intracellularly, okay? And then you can see on the outside there's extracellular fluid. And as you see here, it says extracellular fluid between the cells is intercellular or interstitial. So like I said before, that extracellular fluid can be broken down further into other categories. Also, if you notice here in the blood vessel, part of that extracellular fluid is not just the interstitial fluid that surrounds cells, but also it's the fluid that we find in our blood, especially in the plasma. Okay, so extracellular fluid can be broken down further into fluid that surrounds cells, or we find between cells from one cell to the next cell, and then also the fluid that is found within the plasma of our blood. Another thing I want you to know is that water also plays a role in the maintenance of the body's acid-base balance, so as a buffer as well. So there are other components that are crucial in the fluid balance in our bodies, and electrolytes work with water, which influence the mechanisms of fluid balance in the body. So it's not just water, we also need electrolytes. Now, electrolytes are usually elements on the periodic table that have positive and negative charges, as those of you that remember from chemistry. And a lot of us have learned throughout our courses that their charges are based on the subatomic particles, like the protons and the electrons and the amounts that they contain within their chemistry. So for this course, I want you to know the electrolytes are basically elements, also referred to as ions. And for those of you, just a little memory jogger, ion is an atom or molecule with a net electrical charge due to the loss or gain of one or more electrons, okay? And so as a result of that, we either get a positive or negatively charged element. And so cations are electrolytes that have a positive charge, for example, sodium on the periodic table. And anions are those that have negative charges, for example, like chloride. And I just named sodium and chloride, but we'll learn about them later, that they are involved. They're electrolytes, and they are involved in the fluid balance in our bodies. Now, figure 12.2 in your book, concentrations are balanced, so it shows you a little image on how we balance the concentrations of electrolytes and how their relationship and their contribution to fluid balance. Now, electrolytes attract water. Solutes attract water, and again, solutes are basically the minor components that are dissolved in the main component or body of water, like the solvent, for example. Salt water example. So I'm going to go over an image in your book, but it goes over how electrolytes influence fluid balance, and they are considered the solutes in this case in the body because they're the minor components that are dissolved in the major component, which is the water. Osmosis, for those of you that just a little brief definition, I don't want to go too much in depth, is the water movement across a membrane, and it also involves analyzing what affects that movement across a cell membrane, okay, and in regards and overall how that affects cell fluid balance within a cell. Now, proteins attract water. I want to let you know that anytime there is inflammation in the body and we get swelling that is leaked out of the blood cells or blood vessels, there are certain proteins that put it back in the blood in order for our blood to flush it out of our body. So if you are deficient in proteins, the edema can remain in the outer tissues and the extremities, okay? Now, it is normal to have edema sometimes if you have some kind of condition. For example, a lot of women get it during pregnancy because there is an imbalance of proteins that is going on in the body. But eventually, there are also certain time frames in which the proteins will go and extract that edema that has leaked out of the body into the blood, into the cardiovascular system, so we can flush it out. Water dissolves salts and follows electrolytes. And again, in this case, the salts will be considered the solute, the minor component that dissolves in the solvent, the water. So this is straight from your book. I intentionally put diagrams and images from your book so that you go ahead and get encouraged to read your book and study your book further, because it has crucial information for your exams and for learning material. So as it says here, the negatively charged electrons that bond the hydrogens to the oxygen spend most of their time near the oxygen atom. As a result, the oxygen is slightly negative and the hydrogens are slightly positive. And then on the second image is depicting that in an electrolyte solution, water molecules are attracted to both anions and cations. Notice that the negative atoms, oxygen atoms of the water molecules, are drawn to the sodium cation, which is positive. So again, cations are those electrolytes that are positively charged, whereas the positive hydrogen atoms of the water molecules are drawn to the chloride atoms, as you see here. And you see the movement of molecules or osmosis happening. So here's another example of osmosis from your book. So we see a beaker here, and it says, with equal numbers of solute particles on both sides of the semi-permeable membrane. Our cell members are considered semi-permeable membrane, again, because we have that those phosphate heads that allow it to be somewhat permeable. Then we have those fatty acids or that lipid component that gives it its rigid or hydrophobic component. So it says here, when equal numbers of solute particles on both sides of the semi-permeable membrane, the concentrations are equal, and the tendency of water to move in either direction is about the same. Now, on image 2, it says, now additional solute, so more solute, is added to B, the B side. Solute cannot flow across the divider in the case of a cell, its membrane. Now, number 3, it says water can flow both ways across the divider, but has a greater tendency to move from side A to side B, where there is a greater concentration of solutes. So the volume of water becomes greater on the B side, and the concentration on side A and B become equal. So just an example of osmosis. This is a great, I would say, demonstration that we like to refer to as far to what happens in our body and that permeable cell membrane, semi-permeable cell membrane that we have. When it comes to chapter 12, I decided that I don't want you to know too much about renin, angiotensin, and aldosterone, also involved in a fluid balance in the body. Now, before I go further into a little bit of this pre-assessment, I just want you to know that the renin-angiotensin system that it's referred to is a hormone system that regulates blood pressure and fluid and electrolyte balance, as well as systemic vascular resistance as well. So it has also some functions there in their cardiovascular system. Now, aldosterone is a steroid hormone. Its main role is to regulate salt and water in the body, thus having an effect on blood pressure. So when we talk about blood pressure, it's the aldosterone hormone. It's a steroid hormone. Now, read your book and then come back and to see if you can answer these correctly, because there's only one slide of these. I want you to know minor details about these, only what I cover in this slide and lecture. So here are the answers. Renin is an enzyme released by the kidneys. So I do want you to know that renin is an enzyme and it's released by the kidneys, and that this occurs when blood pressure is high or low. Renin causes sodium to be reabsorbed, which is accompanied by water. So the answers are kidneys. It's an enzyme released by the kidneys. This occurs when blood pressure is low. Renin causes sodium to be reabsorbed, which is accompanied by water. So it does play a role as far as with sodium, and it's released by the kidneys. Okay, number 2, angiotensin 2 is a powerful vasoconstrictor. We have vasoconstrictors and vasodilators, and this one constricts the vasor, so it constricts blood vessels or blood capillaries, and this means it raises blood pressure because we narrow it. Renin is required to convert angiotensinogen into angiotensin 1. Number 3, angiotensin 2 also stimulates the release of the steroid hormone aldosterone. This hormone signals the kidneys to secrete potassium and retain sodium. Thus, in turn, it stimulates the retention of water. So it's involved in that potassium-sodium pump that many of you have learned about in many of your other science courses. Here's the explanation. I provided a little explanation for you guys, for those of you that need further explanation. So angiotensin 1 remains inactive until activated by other enzymes and converted to angiotensin 2. Water follows sodium when it is retained by the kidneys. Regulation by the buffers. Buffers can neutralize acids or bases. Proteins are also buffers, and as well as water. Buffers in body fluids, so carbonic acid from carbon dioxide in the blood is an example. Another example is the pancreas releases bicarbonate into the small intestine in order to eradicate the activity of hydrochloric acid that is coming from the stomach, so that it doesn't erode the walls of the small intestine. Okay, and water plays a role in that as well. Respiration in lungs. So it increases, whether your respiration increases or decreases, it affects how you lose water through the body. Also, when you lose water just through living, respiration is one of them. We call that insensible water loss. And most of us, an average person loses about a liter of water just through breathing, living, and regulating body temperature as a human being. Okay, just the basic biological functions in order to have us live. Excretion in kidneys, bicarbonate excreted, urine acidity fluctuates, body acid burning constant. So what I want you to know here is the kidneys is involved also in excreting certain components in order to neutralize things in our body, and therefore also is involved highly in the buffering process with water. Water balance and recommended intake. So I do want you to know that just as the hypothalamus, which is a small region in the brain, is responsible for what we learned in former chapters in the hunger and appetite. So it affects our dietary patterns and our choices that we make. It also affects our ability to feel thirsty and satiety feeling that we get from drinking water. It's sensed by the mouth, the receptors in the mouth that communicate with that region in the brain, the hypothalamus, and also nerves. Okay, so it's part of the central nervous system feedback system. Now, dehydration symptoms can vary. There's also a spectrum when it comes to dehydration. There could be like early dehydration, moderate dehydration, and then being extremely dehydrated. And I do want you to know that failing to maintain water balance can have dire consequences. As many of us know, we've heard that we can live more without food than we can without water. And dehydration leads to progressive declines in physical functioning, like I said before, because there's a spectrum, whether depending on how dehydrated you are, mild to moderate to severe. And it does increase body temperature and can actually lead to heat-related disorders, as many of you know. Okay, and it can lead to water dysfunctions as well. There's also a term called overhydration. You can also be overhydrated, but that is very rare. But it can lead to a condition known as hyponatremia. So hyponatremia, which is spelled Hyponatremia, sodium concentration decreases in the blood, and this can actually impair neural and muscular functioning. The symptoms actually make a person look like they're drunk or inebriated, which is why hyponatremia is commonly known as water intoxication. And this condition is actually more prevalent, not so in sedentary or average people, but in endurance and ultra endurance athletes. And I have actually, because I used to be a sports nutritionist, but there's been a couple deaths in the United States and actually worldwide with athletes that are endurance athletes that tend to be extremely hydrated during competition. And then what happens is post-competition, they will ingest a lot of water in a small amount of time. And they've already diluted their electrolytes through competition, so they dilute them further by drinking hordes amounts of water post-workout. And then what happens is there's dysfunctioning and water intoxication. Some have died, actually. Okay. Also in Sacramento, there was a radio station in which they held a competition for a big prize on who can drink the most amount of water. I think it was in 1 minute or 2 minutes, and someone died as a result of participating in that competition. And I believe the hosts were fired because of that. Okay. But it's very rare again. Dehydration is what we see most. Now, as far as urine, urine should not be transparent. It means you're possibly overhydrated, like it says here. And it also means that you probably diluted a lot of your electrolytes in the body, which you need. They're essential for body functioning. It is okay for some athletes to be overhydrated and have their urine be a little bit more clear like water. And for example, like I just mentioned, like ultra endurance or endurance athletes like triathletes, cyclists, and runners that are endurance runners like marathoners, because they're going to use a lot of water when they work out. But normal people or people that work out a little bit more normally, their urine should be a little bit more on the light lemonade side. So a little bit more like light lemonade. You also don't want it too dark yellow, because too dark yellow is a sign of dehydration, and too many solutes or electrolytes and too little water. Okay, so let's go on. And then I also want you to know that here's a table from your book about signs of dehydration. So again, if you lose about 1 to 2% of your percentage of water in your body, you can experience symptoms of thirst, fatigue, weakness, vague discomfort, loss of appetite. So not a lot of mental alterations yet. If you lose more, 3 to 4% of your total body percentage, you can have impaired physical performance, a dry mouth, reduction in urine, flushed skin, impatience, and apathy. 5 to 6% water loss, difficulty concentrating. So now we're talking about extreme mental effects, headache, irritability, sleepiness, impaired temperature regulation, increased respiratory rate as well. And then a 7 to 10% of water loss in your body. You can experience dizziness, spastic muscles, loss of balance, delirium. It's not on here, but also vertigo, where you feel like the world is moving. Exhaustion, and you can also collapse and also have heart problems. Which of these is correct about water sources? So water is the main source of water in the diet. Water, fruits, and vegetables are the only water sources. Water, other foods, metabolism, and beverages provide water. Water, beverages, and food are the only water sources. So which of these is correct about water sources? You can pause it and then come back. Here are the answers. So C, water, other foods, metabolism, and beverages provide water. Explanation, water provides about 1/3 of total water intake. Metabolism generates water as an end product as energy-yielding nutrients are broken down, and we learned that in the energy metabolism chapter in chapter 7. Now here are some water sources, and before I go further, for those of you that want more details, you might want to know how much fluid do individuals need on a daily basis. So the adequate intake for water from all sources is 3.7 liters a day for men and 2.7 liters a day for women. So about almost 4 liters a day for men and almost 3 liters a day for women over the age of 19 respectively. And I want you to know that approximately 80% of daily water comes from what another textbook says, from fluids. Thus, approximately 3 to 2.2 liters of fluid consumption per day is recommended for men and women respectively. And I want you to know too that these recommendations may not be adequate for those of you that are active individuals or persons who you expose yourselves to long bouts of exercise, especially if you exercise in hot, humid environments. And you'll need more water increased in your daily plan. Okay. Also, another method for determining water, I want you to know, to determine water intake is based on total caloric intake. In other words, 1 milliliter of water should be drunk for every 1 calorie consumed. Okay. And here we go. So beverages, water sources, you can get 550 to 1500 milliliters from beverages. Foods, 700 to 1000 milliliters. Metabolism, you can gain 200 to 300 milliliters, so a total of 1450 to 2800 milliliters. Now, when we look at that total, let's take a look at how we can lose water on a daily basis and how easily one can become dehydrated. Kidneys, so the urination, 500 to 1400 milliliters a day. Skin and sweat. And if you exercise more, you can lose more than this, because this is more the recommendation for just living, that insensible water loss that we get from just living, 450 to 900 milliliters. Lungs, through breathing, another insensible water loss, 350. And then to defecating, 150 milliliters, so a total of 1450 to 2800. So this does not account for if you do an additional exercise, if you're pregnant, if you're a bigger person. Bigger people also tend to sweat more in order to regulate their body temperatures and their core temperature. So it accounts more for a general person or average thing. So you can see how easily we can lose water. Now it just says here, for those of you that are still learning units of measurement, for perspective, 100 milliliters is less than half a cup, and 1000 milliliters is more than 1 quart. Okay. percentage of water in selected foods. So a lot of waters contain, a lot of food a lot of your foods that you eat on a daily basis contain water. Even pizza, as you see here, pizza is about 40 to 49% water. Whereas other sources, as you see on the top, a lot of fruits and vegetables top the chart when it comes to percentage of water, like bananas, potatoes, avocados, oranges, grapes, watermelon, lettuce, and cabbage, and so on. Okay, so you should know that fruits and vegetables account for fruits, vegetables, and other beverages like milk and fruit juices account for have a higher percentage of water than compared to other food groups. So water recommendations, I did cover them formally. So according to your book, and for the test, if I want you to give me the answers that are in your textbook, I will state the question as follows. According to your book, the adequate intake for total water from sources like foods and beverages is 2 to 3 liters, 8 to 12 cups per day. Now the more optimal amount apart from your textbook is what I mentioned formerly, 2.7 liters or about 3 liters for women, 3.7 liters or about 4 liters for men, okay? And that does not account if you're not physically active. If you're physically active, you'll need more, but those are more optimal levels because we're finding that we might need a little bit more water than we thought. Again, needs vary depending on certain people. If you're pregnant, you will need more because when you get pregnant, you need more blood volume. Your blood volume increases because you have a baby that you need to nourish. So a lot of stuff increase the water, including the water percentage in your body. If you're an athlete as well, sometimes if you're going through certain traumas or surgeries, medical conditions, you will also need more water because you lose a lot of water as well. Some of the best beverages are things like milk, 100% fruit juices, and also for those of you that make smoothies, especially if you use like a milky base, like almond milk, or water as your base, tend to be some of the best choices along with the fruit, because fruit is also high in water. Now, health effects, physical and mental performance. We did go over that in the former slides. So we talked about how there's different spectrums of dehydration. Again, it can affect. I want you to know that as much as 2% water loss in your body can affect physical and mental performance. So that's when you can start feeling the effects. Even though your textbook says you need it in larger amounts to get total mental effects. So as early as 2% water loss, you can start to feel those mental and physical effects. Okay, each person should be aware of their fluid needs and consume fluids accordingly. Also, proper functioning of kidneys, heart, GI tract, and other systems can also affect how you process water. As far as hard water versus soft water, I do want you to read your book for this. I might have a question on the exam regarding hard water versus soft water, but I will go ahead and just cover it very, very briefly on the slide. So hard water is water that contains an appreciable quantity of dissolved minerals, for example, like calcium and magnesium. Soft water is treated water in which the only ion is sodium. And I want you to know that as rainwater falls, it is naturally soft. On the other hand, soft water tastes salty and is sometimes not suitable for drinking. Okay, so that's all I want you to know as far as that. And some people, as far as the health effects, depending on the kidney functions, again, the kidneys are involved in the movement and the processing of electrolytes. So just mentioning what hard water contains and soft water contains, it can also have health effects on someone with kidney problems that aren't able to process electrolytes like a normal individual, healthy individual. So before I move on to minerals and how their roles in fluid balance, I want to close the water portion by saying that about 67 to 70% of the water in our body is found intracellularly, so inside the cell, and the remaining 30 to 33% is found extracellularly or outside the cell. And that 30 to 33% can be further broken down to water that we find extracellularly interstitially from one cell to the next or surrounding cells, and then also in the lymph and also in the plasma of the blood. And the plasma of the blood is this a clear to yellowish liquid, and it's about 90% water, and it's responsible for carrying nutrients in the blood to tissues, okay? Now, go ahead and read these and then come back. So if you guys can read this, minerals are blank elements. This means they are or are not destroyed by heat, air, acid, or mixing. Some foods contain blank that impact mineral bioavailability. Two examples are phytates and oxalates that occur in foods of blank origin. 3, similar to vitamins, an excess of a mineral can create an inadequacy of another. Blank are often to blame. So you can pause the video, read your textbook, the mineral segment, and then come back. Here are the answers. Minerals are inorganic. So unlike macronutrients and vitamins, which are organic, minerals are different, that they're inorganic. They don't contain carbon. So minerals are inorganic elements, unless we're, and this means that they are not destroyed by heat, air, acid, or mixing. So they're more stable than vitamins. We spoke about vitamins, especially the water-soluble vitamins in the former chapters, and how they're easily destroyed by heat, water, and a lot of environmental factors. But when it comes to minerals, they're more stable. Some foods contain binders that impact mineral bioavailability, so how available they are to the human body to be absorbed and used. Two examples are phytates and oxalates that occur in foods of plant origin. And a lot of cultures have ways of preparing their food in order to eliminate some of those binders so that doesn't affect digestibility. For example, cassava in some African cultures are prepared a certain way to extract some of the binders that are often found in those foods. And then also there's a process called nixtamalization that a lot of indigenous Mexicans use in order to eliminate some of those binders that are found in corn. Now, similar to vitamins, an excess of a mineral can create an inadequacy of another. Supplements are often to blame. Here's the explanation. So compared to vitamins that are organic and easily destroyed, minerals differ. When sodium intake is high, both it and calcium are excreted. This is an example of mineral interactions. So let's cover minerals. Now, before I cover major minerals, I want to close the water segment by saying that 67 to 70% of the water in our body is found inside our cells or intracellularly. And the remaining 30 to 33% is found outside the cell or extracellularly. And that extracellular 30 to 33% water that we find outside our cells can also be broken further into that it's divided between the interstitial fluid, which is found surrounding cells, so from one cell to another cell or between cells. It's also can be further broken down into, it's found in the plasma of the blood. The plasma of the blood is that clear to yellowish liquid that is responsible for carrying nutrients in the blood to tissues, and it's about 90% water. And we also find a little bit of water in our the fluid in our brain and also in the lymph. Okay. Now, as far as major minerals, we're going to talk about minor minerals or trace minerals next week. But major minerals are needed in larger amounts than trace minerals. Major minerals, some of them include sodium, calcium, magnesium, potassium, just to name a few. And I do want you to know that I'm almost going to cover every single major mineral in your book, but not every single one of them. So listen to the lecture first, note which ones I'm covering. Those are the ones that will be on your exam. And then go review them and read your textbook to emphasize more on it. Now, a little bit about minerals that play important roles throughout the body. They are considered essential, so meaning your body cannot make them in sufficient quantities to support your bodily functions, so you must ingest them through your diet. They're also involved in important catalytic reactions. They serve as structural components of tissues throughout the body, such as calcium provides structure to bones. And then minerals are crucial for other and variety of bodily functions in keeping people and athletes healthy and strong. And I want you to know that intake of several minerals, specifically electrolytes, has a great importance on bodily functions, especially in sports performance. For you athletes in here, sodium and potassium are the main electrolytes or minerals lost in sweat, and there are major minerals. So sodium and potassium must be replaced on a daily basis, as well as during endurance and ultra-endurance sports to optimize performance and also prevent medical conditions. Now, some characteristics like you found, they're inorganic elements or atoms. They contain no calories, and although essential, they are needed by the body in very small amounts, either milligrams or micrograms, and your major minerals that you see here are usually in milligrams, whereas your trace minerals that you will learn next week are in micrograms, okay? And as we learned, because of their stability, minerals are unaffected by cooking techniques, digestive processes, and our exposure to enzymes, okay? A little bit about minerals is they must be absorbed across the intestinal wall in order to serve their roles within the body. And a variety of factors can affect the bioavailability of minerals. Like we learned, there's some binding factors that we find in plants organically or naturally that affect that, okay? Now, a little bit more about your book is that sodium is the principal. So let's start with sodium. So we're going to cover sodium first now that I've given you a background of minerals, especially major minerals, okay? So sodium is the major principal cation of extracellular fluid. So meaning that it's the main cation that has a positive charge that's found outside the cells, the primary regulator of volume. It's also an acid base. It helps with nerve impulse transmission. We need sodium to contract and relax muscles. And also that's part of sending nerve impulses where it's released in the synapse and it communicates with muscles in order to contract and relax. Sodium travels freely in the blood as well, and kidneys filter out and return what is needed. Now, to function properly, I want you to know the body requires only about 500 milligrams of sodium per day, but for those of you that are active individuals, you're going to need a lot more than that. And I think we need more than 500 milligrams with the fact, my expertise in sodium and studying sodium and the functions of sodium in the body. I think it's pretty, there's an array of functions or roles. So I think even though some sources say that the body requires approximately only 500, I think we need more than that. And that is where the adequate intake comes, which I'll cover in a little bit. Now, sodium recommendations. So I want you to read your book. I was going to go into the recommendations, but I'd rather you read it, pause it, and come back and test yourself before I cover it. So sodium deficiency is it rare or common? And if you choose your answer, explain. High sodium is correlated with blank. There's 3 words. Because of this, the upper limit is blank. An estimated blank % of Americans exceed sodium recommendations. 3, most sodium is consumed as blank, sodium blank. Adults with pre-hypertension or hypertension are recommended to consume less than blank milligrams of sodium per day. The eating plan, especially for lowering sodium, is called blank. So here are the answers. Sodium deficiency is rare. And a small explanation is the body is able to adapt its sodium losses via sweat and urine. High sodium is correlated with high blood pressure, also known as hypertension if you're diagnosed with a condition that is permanent. Because of this, the upper limit is 2,300 milligrams. An estimated 90% of Americans exceed the sodium recommendations, and most sodium is consumed as salt, which is known as sodium chloride. Adults with pre-hypertension or hypertension are recommended to consume less than 1,500 milligrams a day of sodium. So for those that have medical conditions, that's the recommendation. The eating plan, especially for lowering sodium, is called DASH, which that's the acronym of the diet, and it means dietary approaches to stop hypertension. So a little bit more about salt before I go on further. I want to add more. It also aids in the absorption of glucose, which makes it a key component of sports beverages designed to provide energy during exercise. It's a little bit of an athletic component in there because my specialty is sports nutrition. It also want you to know that sodium acts in conjunction with potassium and chloride, which chloride is actually an anion, to create concentration gradients that help maintain proper fluid balance throughout the body. And I'm going to talk about complications of sodium deficiency here in a little bit, but I want you to know that high salt intake associated with increased calcium excretion, potassium as a protective factor. So when we talk about the effects of salt in regards to how it's associated with increased calcium excretion, especially for those that are more of on a high salt diet, are going to be recommended not just to lower their salt intake, but also increase their potassium intake. If the doctor determines or the nutritionist determines they're not meeting their recommended dietary allowance for potassium. Now, the DASH diet is recommended in this case. So in addition, for people with high salt intake who are diagnosed with the condition hypertension, high blood pressure, they will not only be recommended to increase their potassium, but also go on the DASH diet, okay, which also has recommendations on increasing potassium, how to decrease salts, and how to prepare your foods, and how to moderate your food groups in order to meet those goals. Processed foods have the most sodium, so for those of you that are consuming too much sodium, you want to check packaged foods, like especially like anything that's packaged, especially like deli meats that are packaged, canned soups. Examples, I give you examples, a lot of canned soups, a lot of canned foods in general, a lot of deli meats, even dairy products that are packaged like cheeses, you want to look out for amounts. And other packaged foods like potato chips as well, and popcorn. So a lot of those pleasure foods that we tend to go for when we're feeling like we want to cheat or have a family day of fun. Processed foods have reduced potassium, however. I do want you to know that as well. So they're not very beneficial in general. Not only do they not reduce salt intake, but they also don't have good amounts of potassium. Now, potassium is abundant, as you see here, in a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables. Now, I want you to know that potassium is found highly in a lot of fruits and vegetables, and also they also tend to have least amount of sodium. So when we see that DASH diet, you're going to see they recommend a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables because not only do they increase potassium intake, but they also lower sodium intake as well. Sodium and potassium contents of food. So here are some examples. So of unprocessed and processed foods. So as you see here in the bars, potassium is purple and sodium is a yellow or the orange color. So milk has a good amount of potassium and a small amount of sodium compared to potassium. And as you see here, Jello, which has dairy as well, has a lot of sodium compared to the potassium content. And you can go on and on. So like regular roast beef, if you see chipped beef, the content is reversed where the sodium is higher, and so on and so on. So like fresh corn versus canned corn. So in general, a lot of your fresh, wholesome foods have more potassium, less sodium compared to your packaged foods. And even for those of you that consider oatmeal-based cereals for breakfast, as you see here, the oat cereal compared to the rolled oats has a lot more sodium and less potassium. In extreme cases, a drop in blood sodium levels causes blank. So I want you to read these by yourself. You can pause the video right now and just read these to yourself, and then pause them and read your book and then come back to this. Okay. Here are the answers for those of you that come back. In extreme cases, a drop in blood sodium levels causes a condition called hyponatremia, which I might have mentioned earlier. Using an ultra-endurance athlete as an example, sweating causes loss in sodium in water. If too much water is consumed, the above condition develops, which I learned about. Another name for is water intoxication. Acute symptoms of excessive sodium are edema and high blood pressure, and prolonged excessive sodium contributes to hypertension, which is just another name for a condition where you have stabilized levels of high blood pressure. Explanation: hyponatremia is caused by excessive sodium losses, not inadequate sodium intake. Chronic excessive sodium intake damages blood vessels, kidneys, brain, heart, and increases the risk of death from heart disease. Okay. Now, I want you to know too that short-term sodium deficiency can be an issue for individuals who have prolonged diarrhea or vomiting, or who are exercising for a long period of time and have excessive sweat loss. Okay. Some signs and symptoms of hyponatremia is cramping, nausea, vomiting, dizziness, seizures, coma, and if untreated, death. Okay. Now let's go through chloride. I don't want you to know too much about chloride, but I also do want you to know, in addition to fluid balance, chloride is an anion with a negative charge that is involved in fluid balance. But chloride is also involved in muscle functioning as well. So it helps relax muscles. Essential nutrient. Again, your body cannot make it in sufficient quantities to support your bodily functions. You must ingest it through the diet. It then rolls in the body. It's a major anion. Again, it has a negative charge of extracellular fluids. It moves passively across membranes and it associates with sodium and potassium. Also, it helps maintain fluid and electrolyte balance, and it's also part of hydrochloric acid. So a lot of you learned that hydrochloric acid helps with the denaturation of proteins when we digest it, and also hydrochloric acid is an immunity factor. It helps eradicate some of harmful bacteria that may enter our bodies. So it's part of hydrochloric acid as well. So a little bit about chloride. It's abundant in processed foods. A lot of the foods that are high in sodium tend to be high in chloride as well. I want you to, the recommendations slightly are higher, but still equivalent to those of sodium. So a lot of the foods that are highly processed in sodium, I just want you to know the main goal is, the main message is also, they're also high in chloride. Now some foods that are high in chloride, for example, table salt, which comes in the form of NaCl, or sea salt, comes as sodium chloride, is also found in many vegetables. I want you to know that foods with higher amounts of chloride include seaweed, rye, tomatoes, lettuce, celery, and olives. So they are found naturally in some foods, a little higher. I want you to know that chloride is also combined with potassium. It's also found in many foods. Okay, so sometimes chloride can also be combined with potassium in some foods, just because we know that it contributes a role with sodium and potassium in fluid balance. So we want to kind of make sure that we get a big bang for our buck. Deficiency and toxicity, I'm going to go over it very, very briefly. So I want you to know that when you are deficient, and it's, first of all, it's very rare. I want you to know in the US. However, if you do have a deficiency in chloride, the condition is called hypochloremia, and it occurs when there's low levels of chloride in your body. It can be caused, just so you know, by fluid loss, through nausea or vomiting, by existing conditions, even medications or diseases. And your doctor may use a blood test, just so you know, to confirm hypochloremia. And hypochloremia is, the way that you spell it is HYPOCHLOREMIA. And in mild cases, replenishing the chloride in your body can actually treat hypochloremia. Okay. Many people actually do not notice any symptoms unless they're experiencing very high or very low levels of chloride in their blood. Okay. And again, dehydration can contribute to that. So and also for those who have extreme diarrhea or have vomiting in many cases. Conditions leading to deficiency, I just explained. So let's talk about toxicity of chloride. Now, toxicity of chloride is hyperchloremia. So instead of the hypo with the O, it's hyperchloremia. And what I want you to know a little bit is the body's supplies of chlorine are actually rapidly depleted, especially during hot weather. And then when you have excessive perspiration, it reduces the fluid content of the body. So I want you to know that a lot of factors that also influence water outtake or output can also affect chloride toxicity as well. Okay, a lot of times when you lose a lot of fluid in the body and you don't have enough water to dilute a lot of the electrolytes, you will often get high concentrations of a lot of electrolytes in the body. So another major mineral that I'm covering is potassium. If you already are familiar with it, when I spoke about sodium, how there's a sodium-potassium pump in the cells that helps with osmosis and the regulation of fluid balance within the cells. So a little bit about potassium. I do want you to know that the adequate intake for potassium is 4,700 milligrams per day for men and women. And a lot of you probably figured that out in your diet project. Functions of potassium for health and performance. I want you to know that it counteracts the effects of sodium on blood pressure. Thus, it does help maintain a low blood pressure. And that's part of why it's part of that DASH diet. And it also is involved in the interchange and flow of potassium and sodium in and out of the cells. And this is responsible for the transmission of nerve impulses and muscle contraction. So it's involved in nerve impulses and the contraction of muscles. And then it's also one of, like I mentioned before, as you see here on the slide, it's one of the intracellular electrolytes, so inside the cell, critical to fluid balance in the body, and especially during exercise. Okay, so therefore it's said to help maintain fluid and electrolyte balance. It helps maintain cell integrity, aids in nerve impulse transmission, and muscle contraction. Also, complications of potassium deficiency, the condition is called hypokalemia, HYPOKALEMIA, or low blood potassium. It's also caused by frequent vomiting, diarrhea, and use of diuretics as well as low potassium intake. And if you're an athlete in here with high sweat losses, you're also at risk for a potassium deficiency. Let's see if you can guess this. So you can go ahead and read this. You can pause the slide right now, press the pause button, and read the questions, and then attempt to answer them by reading your book, and then come back. So the answers are the following. Potassium is abundant in all cells. Processing destroys cells. Therefore, fresh foods are the richest source of potassium. Potassium has an adequate intake of 4,700 milligrams a day. I already mentioned that. And then diets low in potassium raise blood pressure. Because remember, I spoke how it's involved in regulating blood pressure by lowering it. And to meet potassium needs, people are recommended to consume fresh fruits and vegetables. Another common symptom of potassium deficiency, I want you to know, is loss of appetite and muscle weakness, okay? Also, a rapid change in potassium status or long-term low potassium can also lead to heart arrhythmias, okay? So here's my explanation for the above is high potassium and low salt diets can correct and prevent hypertension. So I talked about deficiencies already, so it goes over them in here as well. I talked about how muscle weakness and loss of appetite are part of this. A rapid change in potassium can also lead to heart arrhythmias. So again, increased blood pressure as well. Kidney stones, bone turnover can increase. So it can lead to some dysfunctioning and weakening of the bones over time. If deficiency progresses, irregular heartbeats, like I was call arrhythmias, muscle weakness, and also glucose intolerance. Now, there's no upper limit right now, so overconsumption from supplements or potassium salts or from certain diseases, I do want to warn you. So we often see overconsumption of vitamins and minerals when it comes to supplements, or if you have a certain disease where you cannot process them in a manner that healthy people can. So they tend to accumulate in the body and have its effects. Now, the kidneys accelerate excretion. If injected into a vein, heart can stop, okay? Other things I want you to know is large doses of supplemental potassium at levels of 18,000 milligrams or higher can actually disrupt muscle contraction and nerve transmission, ultimately leading to a heart attack, okay? Suggestion for a potassium-rich meal or snack, I want you guys to refer to your book and get used to some of them. But fruits and vegetables are the richest sources of potassium, but meat, milk, and tea are also significant sources as well. Potassium in selected foods. So as you can see here, this is straight from your book. So I just want you to go over some of the foods that are high in potassium. Broccoli is one of them. Even a potato. A lot of people don't know this, but a potato provides more potassium per serving than a banana. Calcium. So the last major mineral that we're going to talk about is calcium. And a lot of us know calcium as a major mineral that contributes to bone health. Okay. We're going to talk about the adequate intake. So the recommended dietary allowance for calcium for men and women aged 19 to 50 is 1,000 milligrams. Daily recommendations are higher for men and women aged 9 to 18 as well, and as well those that are older than 50 and 70 as well. So refer to your book for those recommendations. But the main rule here is if you're under 70 years old, most of us need about 1,000 milligrams a day. Now, calcium is important, just so you know, for blood clotting, nerve transmission. A lot of people don't know this, but you need calcium for muscle function and muscle contraction as well. So it's not just involved in bone health. So it grows a healthy skeleton in early life. It helps minimize bone loss in later life. And then if you guys learned in former chapters, the early signs and symptoms or the disease of calcium deficiency is referred to as osteomalacia. And if it prolongs for for a long duration, it can lead to osteoporosis. which is the brittling of the bones. And the majority of body's calcium is in bones and teeth. It's part of bone structure as well. And your cells do have a way of storing calcium because we need it often. Okay, that's part of the calcium bank. And then the body can usually manipulate calcium status by increasing calcium absorption from the intestines or decreasing calcium excretion through the kidneys. And here's more about it. So it helps to maintain normal blood pressure. Um, extracellular calcium. It participates in blood clotting, and it does have a positive charge, so it's considered to be a cation. And it's also found intracellularly. So intracellularly, inside the cells, it binds to proteins in cells and it activates them. And by doing that, it helps with the regulation of muscle contraction, transmission of nerve impulses, secretion of certain hormones, and activation of some enzymes and reactions. So it also has a hormone-like effect in many of our functions in the body. It can be considered also a hormone-like mineral because of that. Calcium balance. So a little bit about calcium balance, just from one slide. Calcitonin is released when blood calcium is blank, so make sure you read your book. So go ahead and pause it, read the questions, and then come back as usual to reveal your answers. So calcitonin is released when blood calcium is high, okay? So that hormone is released when calcium is high in the blood. What effect does calcitonin have on vitamin D in the kidneys? And it's the following: the activation of vitamin D is inhibited. It prevents calcium reabsorption in the kidneys. So there's a way that your body has mechanisms and feedback in order to regulate things, and calcitonin is one when it comes to calcium, when it's too high. 3, the parathyroid hormone, known as PTH, stimulates vitamin D activation. This enhances calcium absorption in the intestines. Osteoclast cells, which are certain kind of bone cells, usually those new bone cells, nice bone cells that are made in the matrix of your bone that are new. Osteoclast cells release calcium into the blood, and then the parathyroid hormone of PTH raises blood calcium levels. So we have two feedback systems here, one when calcium is too high and one when calcium is too low. So this is straight from your book. So I would study the roles of calcitonin a little bit and the role of parathyroid hormone, and just briefly go over what happens when calcium levels are high in the blood and low, like a little bit about the mechanisms of our body, the feedback systems. So before we go over calcium recommendations, I do want to go over deficiency in calcium. So the condition is known hypocalcemia, HYPOCALCEMIA, or low blood calcium is uncommon, I want you to know, in the US. It may occur in cases of malfunctioning kidneys or other disease states or disorders. Now, signs and symptoms of hypocalcemia can include muscle spasms and convulsions. And I want you to know that even though hypocalcemia is rare and occurs mainly in disease states, calcium deficiency in the general population, as well as with athletes, is still one of the most common deficiencies in the U.S. and it increases risk of osteoporosis as well. Okay, in general, individuals in the U.S. typically consume less than 50% of their calcium requirements. Okay. And then signs and symptoms of calcium deficiency can also include impaired muscle contractions, muscle cramps, and they are rare, but they can happen. Okay. Now, if you're an athlete in here, you can also research osteoporosis as one of the components of a female athlete triad that we experience in the sports nutrition field. Okay. For those of you that are my sports nutrition enthusiasts in this class. Recommendations are set high, so in order to retain calcium in bones. So to accommodate 30% average absorption rate, I want you to know here the recommendations for adolescents: 1,300 milligrams a day for them, 1,000 milligrams a day for adults up to age 50. And for women that are older than 50, it's recommended 1,200 milligrams a day. A lot of it is due to the part that is about the age where a lot of women experience menopause. And menopause increases our risk of osteoporosis, and everyone else over the age of 70, the recommendation is also 1,200 milligrams. Now, many of you have heard that somewhere in your 30s you need a big bone mass. So according to your book, up to the age of 20, you have active growth, and somewhere between your after you're 20 and 30, I want to say up to 35, because I've noticed that in my 30s, believe it or not, after 30, I'm almost 40, believe it or not, but after my 30s, I actually grew. I used to be 5'3" for so long, and then when I hit about 34 years old, my doctor measured me and I was 5'4". So, but I might be shorter again. So, I just want to let you know that some of us tend to grow a little bit older than 30. But nonetheless, bone loss is often seen. So the way we turn over our cells, our osteo cells or bone cells, decreases around the age of mid to late 30s until all the way till you're elderly. Okay. Calcium in selected foods. So as you see here, a lot of your dairy products contain calcium, but alternatives to milk are fortified milks like soy milk, almond milk, coconut milk, etc. But you can also find calcium naturally in a lot of dark leafy greens and greens like broccoli. You can also find it in Brussels sprouts as well, and a lot in kale and spinach for those of you that are vegans. And it says here a lot of tofu-based products, bok choy is green, and sardines. So I want you to match these in regards to calcium deficiency. And I already spoke of calcium deficiency formerly, so make sure you rewind back to the slides. But here's a little pre-assessment. So match these: osteoporosis, which one does it match? Peak bone mass, which one does it match? Bone loss and osteopenia. So here you go. A goes with D, osteoporosis, porous and fragile bones, called a silent disease. Peak bone mass, so B goes with A, is achieved by late 20s. Remember I told you that I actually grew in my 30s. And then C goes with C, so bone loss begins at age 30 to 40. Again, there's variations in genetic and other factors. D goes with B, so osteopenia is low bone mass. And that's actually a condition that's prior to osteoporosis, so it's less severe. So the last major mineral I'm going to cover is phosphorus, and this one has a positive charge, so it's a cation. I also want you to know that it has a major role with calcium in regards to bone health. Okay, it's the second most abundant mineral in the body. Other functions of phosphorus that I want you to know is it combines with calcium to form hydroxyapatite and calcium phosphate, which provides rigidity to bones and teeth. It also combines with lipids to form phospholipids, which provides integrity to cell membranes. And then it activates and deactivates enzymes to phosphorylation. Okay, it is also a component, if you remember, of adenosine triphosphate, ATP, which is the usable energy that your cells use, which provides, again, energy for all cell functions. And it also, in quick explosive movements, phosphorus is needed for the formation of creatine phosphate, which provides an immediate form of energy for cells. So for those of you that are power athletes in here and you perform explosive movements like Olympic powerlifters or weightlifting, some of us will use creatine monohydrate or creatine as a supplementation because it's an immediate source of energy for those types of activities. It's also a role in the body. It's part of a major buffer system along with other electrolytes. It's part of DNA and RNA as well, so it's part of our genetic material, and it has roles in that genetic material as well. I also want you to know that if during endurance activities, phosphorate buffers acidic end products of energy metabolism, such as lactic acid, and it allows an athlete to actually sustain effort and delay fatigue more as well. Okay. I talked about lipids in the blood, so it also helps transport lipids in the blood in addition to helping form phospholipids, and it's also a structural component of cell membranes, as I explained formerly, that it combines with lipids in order to form phospholipids. Phosphorus intake deficiencies are unlikely, but I already told you that the recommended dietary allowance is 700 milligrams per day for men and women. Some best sources are meat, poultry, fish, milk, and cheese, some protein. So a lot of protein-rich foods are very high. So animal proteins, including also eggs, dairy, and fish. So for those of you that are a vegetarian type that allow fish in your diet, like pescatarians, you can go ahead and try fish. If you're vegan in here or a stricter type of vegetarian, nuts and legumes and cereals are moderate sources of phosphorus. However, I want you to know that these plants do contain phosphorus in the form of phytic acid, which is not absorbed well, okay? And then a cup of fruit salad and a grilled hamburger with cheese, which is not your healthiest choice, and a cup of skim milk or some actually great sources of phosphorus, okay? Phosphorus supplements, I want you to know, they're usually targeted towards athletes. They claim to prevent fatigue as a result of the buffering capacity of phosphorus. I want you to know that research results are equivocal, just so you know that, okay? I want you to know there is an upper limit for phosphorus because it can be toxic. Through research, we found that it can. So anything above 4,000 milligrams is not recommended, but toxicity is rare in the US. Again, if we do see it, it's usually through people that ingest hordes of supplements. Phosphorus in selected foods, very similar to calcium, to see here some of the broccoli and dairy products, but you can also find it in sunflower seeds, and liver is also a great source. So I had thought that phosphorus was the last major mineral covered, but it's actually magnesium. So magnesium functions for health and performance. It's involved in more than 300 enzyme functions, including DNA and protein synthesis, as well as blood clotting factors, okay? On this slide, towards the bottom, I have that it's involved in, inhibits muscle contraction and blood clotting. So it's involved in a lot of blood pressure regulation, which is a good thing. I want you to know that it aids in the regulation of blood pressure and that magnesium has actually an inverse relationship with blood pressure. Adequate daily intake protects actually against hypertension like potassium. It also stabilizes the structure of ATP or adenosine triphosphate and improves the effectiveness with which the enzyme adenosine triphosphate acts on ATP. I also want you to know that it is involved in glucose and lipid metabolism, and then inside the mitochondria, I want you to know that magnesium is essential for the aerobic production of ATP via the electron transport chain, okay? And then during activity, muscles rely on magnesium for proper contraction and relaxation. And as you see here, more than half is in the bone, so the reservoir to ensure normal blood concentrations, okay? So also another one involved in bone health as well as blood health and other functions, as we see here with adenosine triphosphate, the energy metabolism. Now, some great sources of magnesium include legumes, seeds, nuts, and leafy green vegetables. I also want you to know other ones are whole grains and seafood as well. Now, I want you to know about deficiency, even though it's rare. Let's talk about some common signs and symptoms and some problems. So some problems can include altered cardiovascular function, including high blood pressure or hypertension, as well as impaired carbohydrate metabolism. And some symptoms of deficiency include loss of appetite, muscle weakness, nausea, although first signs of deficiency usually do not surface for several months because a significant amount of magnesium is stored in our bones. And I want you to know if a person continues to consume a diet chronically low in magnesium, other symptoms will emerge such as muscle cramps, irritability, heart arrhythmias, confusion, and possibly high blood pressure as well, okay? And also insufficient magnesium intake allows calcium contracting effect to dominate over magnesium's relaxing effect, and higher blood pressure will ensue. Okay, so a little bit about the mechanism of hypertension there. I want you to know that the upper limit applies to non-food sources. So for those of you that take hordes of supplements, you might want to consider the upper limit is 350 milligrams because it is in a different chemical form and it's more detrimental to our health. Okay, and evidence does not suggest health or performance complications from high magnesium intake is from food sources, only from supplements, like I said before, okay, or medicines. So here are some magnesium in selected foods. We see pinto beans, which is a legume, tofu, soybeans are a legume. We see cashews and some seafood sources like halibut, cashews, artichoke, and you can go on and on. But your book highlighted just a variety of sources to just depict that it comes from a variety of foods. Okay, but so seafood, fruits, vegetables, and whole grains, go ahead and make sure you view those on your own in your book.